Welcome to Tragedy and Interesting, where the stories are as captivating as they are compelling. From the depths of human experience to the heights of adventure, we explore the spectrum of emotion and intrigue. In a new video, we described a nerve-wracking misfortune, including John Edward Jones at Nutty Clay Cave in 2009. John's misfortune started when he messed up driving him into an unsafe, limited section, where he became caught in obscurity anyway. What many don't understand is that John wasn't quick to stand up to such franticness here at the Personnel of Truth. We uncover one more charming story from 1965, highlighting Morris striking, whose experience reflects John's like Nutty Clay Cave occurrence. Morris made an off-base turn, winding up wedged in a tight cleft with no way out. The thing followed was a holding 25-hour salvage mission, everlastingly carving the risks of underground investigation into history on a fresh fall morning in the immense park, the ideal setting for an excursion. 16 young people and 3 educators from the Methodist Kids' Home in Berea, left on an arrangement, stumble on October 5, 1965, to Schönbrunn town in Tuscaro. West District anyway, a lamentable punctured tire episode on the way constrained. Them to modify their direction, fast reasoning, and act of spontaneity drove them to the Hinckley Reservation home of Wildcat Cavern in Whip's Edges. As the gathering moved toward Wildcat Cavern, an unmistakable feeling of expectation and fervor lingered palpably. Morris specifically couldn't contain his enthusiasm for investigating the cavern. In spite of the fact that he and his companions had visited the cavern on past field trips, this time the experience was bound to veer off in a strange direction. The cavern had never been formally planned or completely investigated, so we reproduced the inside sections in view of the stories and recorded reports. Accessible Wildcat Cavern, settled in a sandstone precipice, flaunted an entry 15 ft wide and 4 ft high, looking like a dim, rugged mouth. While the outside and its environmental elements were famous among local people, the inside held on to an entrancing history throughout the long term. The cavern had filled in as a shelter for crooks and runaway slaves, developing a legend that, additional to its air of secret and disquiet, entering the cavern one would experience a restricted section approximately 80 ft long, known as the primary passage. At its end, an opening uncovered an enormous inclining rock that overwhelmed the space preceding, with directly starting here. The entry prompted a sizable chamber trusted by nearby custom to have been a 19th century concealing put for got away from slaves in transit to Canada. It was not difficult to mistake this section for 2 others around the inclining rock, particularly without legitimate lighting and past experience inside the cavern, since nobody had investigated these sections before they stayed. Unknown. The gathering of 3 chose to dive into the cavern and investigate a well-unknown. Chamber Morris, elected to lead the gathering, anxious to grandstand. His past experience exploring the fundamental passage anyway, his certainty before long dwindled as he understood his previous experiences had not set him up sufficiently for what lay ahead. At first, strolling inside the primary passage establishes an agreeable climate with adequate room to move after around 60 ft. However, the passage starts to recoil, expecting wayfarers to move in a hunching down position. After arriving at the intersection, Morris saw a huge stone and accepted that the section to the enormous chamber followed its curve, with nobody scrutinizing his choice to continue forward. He continued onward as Morris went into the cleft. The space for moving diminished dramatically, driving him to slither on his stomach. Claustrophobia grasped him as the cavern wrapped him in murkiness. Yet Bates stayed persuaded that the opening to the enormous chamber lay ahead, only 2 or 3 few additional feet away, inch by inch. He started to feel tension around his middle and hips. What Morris didn't understand in that frame of mind of the press burrow was that he was creeping downwards. The human body depends on the vestibular contraption to decide its equilibrium and position without sufficient visual data. For example, in dimness, equilibrium can be impacted as the eyes accumulate data about direction from the climate of pushing. Increasingly hard, Morris wound up in a circumstance like J. and Edward Jones, where the declining way prompted a sharp calculated cleft. The 110 leb57 kid crawled into the clammy tricky fissure and tumbled straight into a 9 in break, sticking his hips and body anxious to get away from the bounds of the halfway house and appreciate light-hearted minutes with his companions. Morris wound up wrestling with the outcomes of his decisions. The cavern, once supposed to be a thrilling spot to investigate, had now turned into an expected grave for him as he explored slender entries and turned in restricted spaces. His body became shrouded in cuts and scratches. The crucial point in time showed up when Morris acknowledged he was separated from everyone else in the profundities of the cavern. He was unable to move, unfit to move. He called to his two buddies for help. Yet it required some investment for the young men to fathom what is happening and comprehend where the frantic shout was coming from. Out of dread, they hustled to get an instructor who fit into the cavern and attempted to utilize his belt to rope the kid's lower leg. The educator couldn't draw near enough to Morris, terrified of stalling out too. Once he arrived at the most secure zone, he tossed the belt onto Morris's feet and begun pulling. Achievement appeared to ease up. However, it finished rapidly when the belt broke and Battelle wedged further into the hole. As of now, Morris began encountering trouble breathing because of the external tension on his chest. In the murkiness and cold, the educator could hear dread and frenzy into Morris's voice as he implored him to find another person to save him. The educator promptly called for proficient assistance. The primary on the scene was fire boss Paul Chodura, who drove a crew to Wildcat Cavern. Firemen introduced a compact generator to light the cavern, and crews funneled oxygen to the kid. They chose to utilize a pulley framework with snares, however. The salvage endeavors confronted critical difficulties. The geology of the cavern gave capricious obstructions, tight sections, and sharp twists, making access. Troublesome. Morris was caught a significant separation from the entry, further entangling endeavors to contact him. Restricted perceivability and claustrophobic circumstances inside the cavern added one more layer of trouble to the salvage. Each move was executed with alert, considering the constant hazard of injury to the heroes and the potential for demolishing what is happening, joining strategic expertise and T-worthy boldness. The heroes investigated different methodologies to liberate Morris from his tricky position. Workers for hire proposed to penetrate through 36 ft of stone. However, geologists dreaded a cavern and explosive was precluded too. The problem hauled into the evening, and tension developed among both the heroes and the powerless spectators watching what is going on from outside the cavern. The temperature dunked into the 30s as in excess of 200 crisis laborers, observers, family members, and correspondents accumulated at the scene. The narrative of the caught kid became headline news the nation over and the subject of public TV programs. Radio stations pursued for help from the local area, inciting Evelyn Pinky Pettit, a 5B2 85 lb medical caretaker from Aiken, to drive to the cavern and wriggle into the entry. She could draw no nearer than 5 ft, except for went through almost 3 hours consoling the kid. While Eros arranged another technique to haul Morris out. One of the strategies was proposed by experienced cave pilgrim Terry Brown of Aiken, who recommended fixing an extemporaneous pulley rather than snares with a metal ring spiked to the top of the cavern. Heroes pulled and pulled, however Strong moved a couple inches, just to be pushed in reverse. Once the pulley delivered, the primary worry of the heroes was Morris's cognizance. Assuming that the kid dropped, there would be no technique to haul him out without his own work. This large number of subtleties infer the Nutty Clay Cave misfortune salvage mission that finished the second John Jones passed out. Pulling the body from the fissure, utilizing various strategies, takes just 80%, and the leftover 20% must constantly be loaded up with the casualties pushing endeavors the entire evening. Heroes continued to attempt to encourage the kid. They inquired as to whether he had a sweetheart. They guaranteed him a fancy meal. They made the most of him to 25. And back again, many people offered help. However, many couldn't draw near sufficient in the wake of entering the cavern. It's been over 24 hours. And right now, heroes were left with just a single endeavor, as Morris's responses turned out to be increasingly obscure, and there was no time to spare. In the first part of the day, the U.S. Flying Corps flew a group from the Public Spical Society in Washington, D.C. Mechanic Curtis Peck and his Uncle Paul P.E. contrived an arrangement, and to execute it, they sent 15 years of age Hawk Scout Michael Reek of North Royalton, who wriggled into the cleft. He had the option to draw nearer to Morris than any other person had before Michael tossed a rope to Morris, and he had the option to pull it over his arms, as R.I. later told journalists. Morris lay on his right side and could utilize one arm as per Michael. It was very close and terrifying in there. He was told to utilize a glycerin arrangement by pouring it on Morris's hips to make them elusive, after which he pushed a thin help load up under Morris's legs to make less rubbing. Once pulling began. With Michael's order, the group began pulling Bates. Old slipped a couple of times, however. With firm pulling from above, he broke free. Loud cheers emerged as the kid was enclosed by a sweeping and lifted out of the section over 24 hours after the difficulty started. Many observers commended as the youngster was stacked into a holding-up emergency vehicle. Luckily, the place of the kid was around 60 degrees, which assisted him with remaining alive for such a significant stretch of time. On the off chance that the fissure had been more extreme, Morris could never have had as much time until Heroes sorted out the best technique to haul him out. The Recreation Area Administration dynamited the rear of Wildcat Cavern hours after Nibble-Old was liberated in basically the same manner with Nutty Clay Cave. The entry was for all time fixed with concrete. The example was learned for the following 44 years until everything rehashed, except this time with a terrible consummation. Thank you for joining us on Tragedy and Interesting. If you found this video captivating, give it a thumbs up and share it with your fellow adventurers. For more tales that tug at the heartstrings and stir the imagination, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell.